in 2024, Foo Fighters probably the biggest pure rock band on the planet, and there's no doubt that Amazon is one of the biggest giants on the planet. Those guys kind of did the same thing. They had something rattling around in their head, and it had to come out. For Grohl, it's a riff, it's a verse, it's a lyric. For Bezos, it's a concept. It's seeing this non-physical idea become a physical reality. And then you surround yourself with a band, or in the case of an entrepreneur, a team. You pitch yourself to labels, you pitch yourself to distributors, you pitch yourself to vendors, and you hit it big or you don't. And it's almost the exact same process, which is sort of eerie to think about when you consider that most people think that entrepreneurs and musicians could not be more different. It's really the exact same thing.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Unleashed, the fastest hour on the internet, where every episode I'm joined by a best-selling author or accomplished leader who shares common sense leadership ideas, all in the name of helping you make a greater impact. I'm your host, Jeff Tetz. Most leaders feel their business could perform better. At Results, we help leadership teams achieve their bold visions by providing a unique system of accountability and ongoing coaching to create more predictable and successful outcomes. Reach out for a conversation at unleashresults.com. Well, we've got a really interesting conversation today. Now, imagine if you could brand your business like a rock star. Well, that's what we're talking about today with my special guest, Steve Jones. Now, Steve Jones has spent 35 years leading music and media organizations around the world. Today, Steve is the Senior Vice President of Brands and Content for Stingray Radio. Now, Stingray is the world's third largest distributor of music behind only Spotify and Apple. They're a massive media organization. And over the course of more than 3 decades, Steve has led successful media brands in the US, Canada, and the Caribbean. Along the way, he's had a unique front row perspective on the rise and sometimes the fall of countless rock stars. Those experiences form the basis for his 2 best-selling books, Brand Like a Rock Star and Start You Up. Steve has worked alongside countless stars in music and observed how they strategically created passionate fan bases, built dedicated followings, and forged lasting and immensely profitable careers. He shows you how to apply those lessons to your very own business. Steve, welcome to Unleashed.
It is awesome to join you today. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I look forward to all these conversations, but I think this one in particular, just based on the folks that you rub shoulders with, Steve, and the insights that you have in addition to that, is going to make this one extra special.
I think that's what's made it fun for me, and it's what makes it fun for audiences when I'm speaking, is that the topics, they're universal, the stories are fun, and what I love about sharing business wisdom through the lens of music is that the learning part's kind of hidden. When I start talking about a great band that you've listened to your entire life and the songs that shaped you and that influenced you as you were a kid, I think people's minds that might traditionally be closed off to certain things, just they open up. Music does that. It's like that amazing universal language. And when minds are open, you can then implant all kinds of really cool business concepts without anyone really knowing it happened.
Yeah. Well, and you have a lot of insights to share. I know that your content is fantastic, but I'm also really interested in your career trajectory and how that's all evolved. And Steve, I wondered, how did you get into the radio, media, entertainment business in the first place?
I'm so fortunate. I kind of knew what I wanted to do when I was a kid. I was 12 years old listening to the radio. I lived here in Toronto and would listen to a station called 1050 Chum. It's no longer around. It's now a TSN station. But back then it was the big AM top 40 that all the kids listened to, played all the hits. And I would wander up, peer in the window. I just wanted to be a DJ on the radio. I tried my hand in the years after that at pretty much every musical instrument, and I was terrible at every single one. And it did become apparent to me that the only way I was going to have a career in music, in media, would be to somehow get in through the back door with radio, because I was never going to be a lead guitar player or a singer or a drummer or whatever other. I took piano, saxophone, pretty much every instrument a kid could take. And it was brutal. I was terrible at all of them. So I just pursued radio as my way to get into that world that I loved so much. And I started on the air really young, like maybe I was 14 or so, at a very small radio station in Northern Ontario. And I did that through high school. And then I went to university, and very quickly it became apparent to me that the career I wanted was already waiting for me. And so I did a little bit of university. I like to say I finished my studies at Lakehead University. That's where I finished them. I didn't finish their program, but I finished my portion of it, and started to pursue radio full time. And one of the cool revelations that I stumbled into early on was that I felt like I knew what it took to be great on the radio as a performer, as an on-air host, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Like, I just didn't have it in me to be as vulnerable and just raw and honest and all those things that go into making a great radio talent. I knew what it took, but I couldn't do it myself. And that led me more into management than to being on the air. And I got into managing radio and media brands for a while in Edmonton, and then on the East Coast of Canada. And then later to the US, where I worked in Boston for a while. And then in an awesome sort of midlife crisis turn of fate, to the Caribbean, where I managed a group of media brands down there, and then back to Canada. And through all that, inevitably you come in contact and in touch with all these musicians and these management companies and record labels and all the stuff that you might see in a movie like Almost Famous or Rockstar. All the things, all the stereotypical things you think you would see, you definitely see and experience. And they provided a really interesting framework to look at business, at success, at entrepreneurship, at organizational strength and structure. And in about 2011, I sort of came up with this idea that the things I was observing in these bands that I was fortunate enough to rub shoulders with, the things that I was observing, sometimes they were doing it by accident, sometimes very strategic, but they were really the very same things that great organizations, great businesses, great leaders were doing to ensure their own success. And so I used that as the jumping off point to write a book called Brand Like a Rock Star. It came out in, I think, 2011. And the book is essentially subtitled Lessons from Rock and Roll to Make Your Business Rich and Famous. And that took me down the path of public speaking, keynoting, and another book. And to this day, I continue to do as many keynotes as I can squeeze in, because I love doing it. I love meeting and networking with really cool people and being part of, industries that I've had no connection to, and learning from them. And at the same time, I continue my day job with an organization called Stingray, and I look after radio content for them.
Well, that's a massive organization. Now, Steve, I want to come back. So you went from sort of what I would call in front of the camera, even though it was no camera, you're in front of the microphone. You decided that you knew what it took to become successful, but you weren't really willing to do it. So then you got into the business side of it. When you look back on that, was there any form of regret, or was there anything about that decision to get out of the disc jockey seat to become a public speaker? Like, did that motivate you to overcome? Like, did you have some fear there, or the angst to do what it took? Like, what was going on there for you?
I knew that I had something to offer, and it was in coaching and guidance and mentorship. It was in leadership. It wasn't in doing it in the trenches. I seem to intrinsically know that. And so it was a very easy transition into management. It felt like where I needed to be. When I started doing the keynoting, that's where the two worlds collide in such a fun way. Because for me, being back up on stage is a lot like, being on the camera or on the microphone. It's that same sense of, performing and here we go, and the risk and the excitement that goes along with it. I assume it's the same kind of feeling a band gets before they go on stage. And it should be the feeling any of us get before we walk into a critical meeting where we're going to close a big deal, or, a town hall with our team, and we know that it's critical that we inspire them and bring them to greatness. I think that nervousness, those butterflies, that energy, it's awesome to have that. I wish I could have done it with a guitar in my hand, but that wasn't my fate.
Yeah, it was the next best thing, I suppose. And I think you're right about the rush of adrenaline there that you get from the public speaking piece. Now, there's something else that occurs to me about your skill sets, and I think I would call it pattern recognition. You weren't just blindly meeting these bands; you were paying attention and you were picking up on patterns. Now, what was the earliest memory you have when like some of the light bulbs started to go off for you about some of the patterns on how they branded and marketed themselves?
I remember in the mid 90s, early 90s, meeting Garth Brooks, and my wife asked me, is Garth Brooks as nice as he seems to be? And I said, he is either that or the greatest actor that's ever lived. And we know from his limited acting that that's not the case. So that was probably the first moment where I thought, this guy is intentionally doing things to bond with people. He's creating relationships and connections with people. And that's the first time I remember being conscious of it. I like the idea of pattern recognition. I've often referred to it as business topography, where, I've watched one thing over here that applies over here. Across different, verticals or different industries altogether. But it's the same idea. And the Garth Brooks one is the first one where I remember that light bulb going off. And then when I did a period in working in country music for a few years in the 90s when country was super hot, that really started to come together. Those dots started to be connected because country music at the time was really taking a playbook from rock music, 20 years earlier. It was a really cool time to be around country music. And as I continued my career from there, those connections became apparent everywhere I'd look. And once you notice it, it's everywhere.
So what was the pull for you, the deeper rooted pull to start paying attention and do something with that topography, as you call it?
The catalyst for me was a course I took in Austin, Texas, at a non-traditional business academy down there. And one of our assignments one night was to write a piece of, persuasive writing. I can't remember exactly what the parameters were, but I was sitting on the patio at this little campus, sipping a Corona, listening to Margaritaville. And I thought that's the Buffett I want to build my career after. I mean, Warren's great, but Jimmy Buffett is the legend. And I wrote a short piece about everything you need to know about business you can learn from Jimmy Buffett. And it went over really, really well. So then I started to gather up all my thoughts from all these years of watching both the bands I loved, but also watching the clients we worked with, because in the radio and media space, we're constantly working with businesses who are advertising, promoting, launching, and growing their business. And that initial piece about Jimmy Buffett was just the catalyst to start thinking about all of it in a more structured and logical way. And that led to the book probably just 2 years after that.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. Now, the work that we do with our clients, a big piece of it is actually helping them position their business uniquely and clearly in the marketplace. And so I know that we can talk about all these famous stories and these bands, and I want to get back to some of that, but I also want now to get to some of sort of the tactics and the strategies and those dots that you have pulled out and connected, I think, Steve. And I know you're going to probably do some myth busting here today. And for starters, I think I've often held the belief that if you're just insanely good at what you do, eventually, that's going to win in the marketplace. But you suggest that that's actually a mistake. Can you explain?
Yeah, I do think that being insanely good is important. It's always been important, and it's probably never been more important because Yelp and Google reviews can kill a business before it even gets off the ground. People have never had louder microphones, both for and against what you might do. So you've got to be insanely good. That's a given. But a lot of people make the mistake of thinking they can differentiate themselves in the marketplace by being incrementally better. And if I, create a winter tire that's 5% more, traction friendly, or I create a product that's X% more whatever than my competition. I think though it's flawed thinking to believe that in and of itself is going to differentiate me in the marketplace. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that we all have different definitions of what better is. For one, I mean, if my boss pulls in the parking garage at work in a Porsche and I pull in a Honda Civic, who has the better car? A lot of people would argue the Porsche is better. It's more expensive. It's more prestigious. It goes a lot faster. And you could make a case that the Civic's better. It was a wiser financial move. It's a lot cheaper to refuel and it's a lot cheaper to repair. It might last me a long time. There's 100 reasons why one might be better than the other, and it's all in the eye of the beholder. So that's one flaw we tend to hit with that thinking that being better will differentiate us. It will to some people, it won't to others. And then the bigger issue is that how is anyone going to notice differentiation? If you're that winter tire manufacturer and you are so deep in the world of winter tires, you know that 5% more traction might save a life. It might save hundreds of lives. It's a huge advancement. The average consumer doesn't care that much about what you make, whether it's winter tires, whether it's wine, whether it's jeans, computers, whatever it is you do. They are not in the same foxhole as you, fighting the same battle as you, and they don't have the knowledge you have. So, you've created a product that's incredibly good. It's way better than anything else that anyone's ever done. Why doesn't anybody care? Well, they don't have the knowledge that you have, and they just don't care. And then the third issue is that until we notice you, until you stand out, until you truly differentiate in a way that's meaningful, our lives as consumers are just way too busy to pay attention to what it is you're doing that might be incrementally better and might incrementally benefit us. In music, my favorite example of that is Kiss. Their name was Wicked Lester in the early 70s, and they were about to break up. They could not get any traction or success. And Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons decided they wanted to give it one more shot. They changed their name. They decided on this ridiculous comic book makeup imagery. They started spitting blood and breathing fire and scaring children. And within 2 years, went from absolute obscurity to headlining a world tour. I think those of us who have done anything for a period of time that takes skill, takes knowledge, commitment, we know that you can't go from terrible to world-class at anything in 2 years. Kiss didn't write songs that were 7.3% catchier. They were probably average to decent musicians as Wicked Lester, and I would assess that they're average to decent musicians now. The difference is we all had to pay attention. They forced an entire generation and generations on either side of that generation to pay attention. When Kiss was at their peak in that sort of late 70s window, it was impossible for anyone to ignore them. My parents didn't listen to that kind of music, but my parents knew who Kiss was. I knew who Kiss was. My sister knew everyone knew who Kiss was. And that was key for them. They needed to stand out and get noticed. Once they stood out and got noticed, they had that opportunity to demonstrate to us why they were better, whether it was lyrics, whether it was harmonies, whether it was virtuoso on guitar, whatever it might be. Until we notice you, we can't possibly know that you're any better or any different. You're invisible. And that's sort of the rub, is that people think that the opposite of love is hate. I think the opposite of love is invisibility. I would much rather have a company say, I don't like your business because of A, B, and C. And if they're accurate, even if they're not accurate, I would rather that than to have them say, I don't know, never heard of you.
Yeah. At least they're acknowledging you're around.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Steve, I got to ask you then, when I hear you talk about Kiss, I mean, my eyes light up because I was born in 1976, and one of the first records, well, the first 8-track I can remember listening to was Meatloaf, and then it was the Bee Gees. But soon after that, the very first vinyl record I was given was by my uncle, and it was Kiss's first live album. And that was another thing they did to stand out. But I used to do air guitar with kid-sized plastic pull cues on my bed with 2 of my closest friends to Kiss. So that really hits home. But when I think about Kiss and how overtly they tried to get attention, I can't help but think of the opposite scenario, which was the grunge era. Like when I look at grunge, like I look at that era of music as a group of people outside of Seattle that like didn't want to get noticed. Like they were just trying their best to like, I don't care if anybody cares. We're just making music. And yet the meteoric rise that genre had, like what was happening there? I would love your insights.
That's a fantastic point that you've raised. And I think it comes down to zigging when others are zagging. That in the late 80s, the music industry was dominated by hair bands, Poison, and all these makeup, the feathered hair, and all that. That was the sound. And on the pop side, it was Madonna, and it was bright and colorful. And along came Nirvana and all the bands that came after them in the grunge area with a completely different look and a completely different approach. And yeah, it was kind of the opposite. It was like, I don't want to be seen. I want to stare down at my shoes. But that was differentiation. That was bold differentiation, and it changed music. There were bands who were at the top of their game in the late 80s, early 90s that never, ever recovered from the rise of grunge because it just put an end to an entire genre of music.
Now, who were some of those casualties, Steve, just off the top of your head, if you can think of some?
Yeah, I mean, Poison comes to mind because they had such a string of #1 hits, and then it was all over because their music just suddenly overnight was painted as empty. But even a band like Guns N' Roses, that in 87, 88, 89, huge, the Use Your Illusion album in 91, 92. And then I think absolute musical confusion after that. And the band imploded and spent a long time wandering around in the darkness before sort of recovering as a nostalgia act today. There were a lot of bands who never, ever after 1991 could have the success that they had prior. And that was because one band in one genre differentiated themselves so much and captured the zeitgeist of a generation.
Yeah. I want to come back to something you said there around, customers, they don't know what incrementally better looks like. They don't know how to see it. They don't care about it. I mean, I always think of branding as customers only care about whether or not you can solve their problems. And if they can't clearly figure that out right away, then you're out of the loop. And we get lost inside our own businesses, right? So we get lost in our own points of differentiation. We know it so well. We think other people will care about the things we do, and they generally don't. What are some ways then that companies can try to get an accurate sense of what the market will pay attention to and care about?
That's interesting. It comes down for me to the bold and brave process of understanding that some people won't like you if you stand out and you are different, and not capitulating to complaints or people who say they don't like you. Roy Williams, in his book The Wizard of Ads, wrote that the risk of insult is the price of clarity, and I have to. The risk of insult is the price of clarity. I have to accept that in order to stand out, you might not like what I do, but that's the price that we pay to stand out. So it begins with accepting that and going forward, boldly believing in what you're doing and being ready to withstand the storm of negativity that might come with that. But producer Rick Rubin, who is just, legendary in so many ways, for his work with name almost anyone from Tom Petty to Johnny Cash to Run DMC, all over the map. This guy's just an incredible legend. But he talks about creating music for yourself and not for the audience. Because when you create it for the audience, you compromise on what you believe in. And I think that's a really cool point, that almost everyone who started a business started it not because they wanted to get rich, but because they believed that they had something valuable to share with the world. They had the ability to solve problems for customers. They had something, whether it was an idea or a product or a work ethic or whatever, that they felt would change the world. So they launched a business to do it. Businesses that launch with, how can I make the most money quickly, almost always fail, because great businesses are based on core values, on having something to stand for. I love Yves Chouinard, who founded Patagonia. He was in the 60s, he was rock climbing, and he realized that the pitons he was using were damaging the rocks permanently, and they were harming the environment. So he sourced out European ones that didn't harm the environment that way and founded a company selling those. And the company's ethos is, let's do less harm to the environment than anyone else. Let's harm the environment as little as we can while we make as much money as we can. To this day, Patagonia lives by that and has become incredibly successful. And Yves Chouinard incredibly rich at the same time, but not because he wanted to get rich. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, well, and I think Patagonia is a really interesting example, because the exposure that I have had to sort of their origin stories suggests that it was less damaging to the environment. It was building community, but it was also centered around quality. So high quality equipment. When they made the decision to get into the garment industry, it was going to be high quality garments that would stand the test of time. So it's like the foundation of their business was quality, but they needed to figure out a way to get noticed then. And I wonder, do you have any insight on any of the things that they did to try to take it more in a rock star direction?
Oh, my favorite example from Patagonia is I think it was 2013 when they did a Black Friday ad. And the ad was a beautiful new Patagonia jacket. And the ad just said, "Don't buy this jacket." Picture of the jacket. And then the other side of the ad was all the reasons why you shouldn't buy that jacket. You can get a used one. You could donate yours. You can repair them. They last forever. They took out an ad. They spent millions on an ad that said, "Don't shop with us." That's very rock star to me. That's very bold. They know full well that their clientele will buy that jacket. They know full well that their clientele values the fact that they said, "Don't buy that jacket." It's brilliant marketing. It's bold. It's the kind of marketing that stands out and allows the consumer who might not be as educated into, climbing gear, camping gear, and outdoor goods to become educated because they've stood out and been noticed.
Yeah, appreciate the example. I can't help but wonder if there are some cultural differences, and let's just take Canada and the United States. I've always sort of hypothesized that the U.S. bigger and better, more brash, those types of things, and I wondered if any piece of it is because the population is so dense that if this relationship doesn't work out, I can very quickly find another one. Where in Canada, is there any part of the humility and the understatedness that we have related to the fact that, I'll take Edmonton where I live. And I think if we set our company on a bold advertising campaign that's going to alienate a bunch of people, but they're going to know we're here, I'm also going to see those people at the mayor's luncheon. And does that inform the way that we do things differently in Canada?
I think it does to a degree. And I should clarify that standing out from the competition doesn't necessarily mean intentionally creating things that are off-putting. It doesn't mean you intentionally need to offend anyone, but Yeah, I think when you stand out and get noticed, you subject yourself to the highs and lows that go along with that. And if you've got to see them at the mayor's luncheon or the Chamber of Commerce or church or school drop off or minor hockey or whatever else it is, yeah, it may inform how you handle yourself. I think that there are a lot of differences that I see working in both countries all the time. For me, the most obvious is that I try to come at my keynotes with that same sense of humility. And a lot of the time I will be on a bill at a conference or convention with some speakers who are very over the top, very animated, very in your face. And I don't know if that's an American Canadian thing. I attribute it to that. I think Canadians are just a little more humble in their approach, a little more storytelling and a little less bravado. And it might be because of the size and scope of our market and clientele. It could be just, hundreds of years of an inferiority complex living next to an elephant like the United States. I don't know, to be honest with you, but it is very real. And it's a great point, because you do have to consider the implications of what you do to stand out and get noticed.
Yeah.
You do have to, the smaller the market, the more you have to live with the outcomes you've created.
Yeah. I think that there's a lesson here for us too that I try to live by, that whatever you lean more towards, whatever your tendency is. And so if you're too polite, it is really rare that you would ever be considered in your face or impolite. So we should all endeavor, I think, to sort of stretch out of our comfort zone, because the chance that you're ever going to overdo it is I think minimal.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I love the idea that what you do is like who you are at your core really does become part of your business and your brand identity. And brands that are rooted in falsehoods or lies or untruths are almost always somehow outed. And brands that are driven by core values, by people who believe good things and do good work, have a much greater chance of success. I think it's hard to fake it for a long period of time, and it's no fun to fake it, particularly if you're running a small business or if you're talking about your own individual brand. It has to be rooted in reality and who you are. You have to live that.
Yeah. Well, I've long held the belief that you can't build a successful business if you wouldn't do it for free. And I say that, and I say that with, tongue in cheek a little bit, or you can sprinkle a little salt on that for sure. But I love the rock analogies. And one of the favorite documentaries, Steve, I ever saw was the one about the Eagles that came out, a handful of years ago. Yeah. And I just love the origin stories of Kenny Rogers, like getting them introduced to one another. I love Glenn Fry living upstairs while Jackson Brown's in the basement, and every day, Glenn Fry could hear Jackson Brown's kettle, and then he'd get on the piano and he'd write music and all of those things. But like the thing I love about those stories is they were all struggling, right? They were trying to figure out a way just to eke out a living because they loved their craft. And I think that there's a big lesson there in our businesses, is that you can't fake it. Like if you've got a problem that you're so ambitious to solve, if you love your craft to that degree, you never would be inauthentic, because that's just the essence of who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I met a guy a few weeks ago here in Toronto who runs a gin distillery. It's the only pure gin distillery in Toronto. And he talked about his origin story, and it's kind of the same thing. He was a craft brew guy, craft beer, loved craft beer, and then got exposed to gin in the UK and loved gin, and came back here, and there was no place to get that craft gin that he had fallen in love with in the UK. So he created a craft gin experience. He created a gin distillery, and the amount of crap you go through to put up a distillery in Canada, in Toronto, there's a lot of regulation, a lot of red tape, a lot of waiting around, a lot of losing money while bureaucrats look at documents. And he went through all of that. I have no idea how I suspect they're doing well now, but it's been a couple of years of hard struggle, just like Glenn Fry living above Jackson Brown. And you only can withstand that struggle if you're in it for the right reasons. I think the link, like one of my favorite analogy to illustrate the link between musicians and entrepreneurs, because a lot of people think entrepreneurs are logical. They're linear thinkers. They're numbers people, and musicians are freaky artists who look at life an entirely different way. It was the summer of 1994 in Seattle when Jeff Bezos started a business in his garage by himself because he thought that the internet could become a place where people could buy stuff. And at the same time, Dave Grohl starts a band in Seattle, 18 miles away from where Bezos was, because he believes that the music inside of him, because before that, Dave Grohl was a drummer in Nirvana. He had these songs that were inside of him that had to come out. And as a drummer, you don't really get to do that in a band. So he created Foo Fighters in his garage, and Bezos created Amazon in his garage. And, in 2024, Foo Fighters probably the biggest pure rock band on the planet. And there's no doubt that Amazon is one of the biggest giants on the planet. Those guys kind of did the same thing. They had something rattling around in their head, and it had to come out. For Grohl, it's a riff, it's a verse, it's a lyric. For Bezos, it's a concept. It's seeing this non-physical idea become a physical reality. And then you surround yourself with a band, or in the case of an entrepreneur, a team. You pitch yourself to labels, you pitch yourself to distributors, you pitch yourself to vendors, and you hit it big or you don't. And it's almost the exact same process, which is sort of eerie to think about when you consider that most people think that entrepreneurs and musicians could not be more different. It's really the exact same thing.
Yeah. Steve, I want to come back a little bit to positioning, and I have been through enough personal, branding and positioning exercises in various businesses that I've been involved with to know that it can be a confusing process, and everybody's got something to add, a glorified exercise of wordsmithing. What kind of advice or tips, or even tactics, if you want to go that granular, do you have for organizations for when they're trying to figure out what their positioning in the market is and then go about testing it?
Yeah, I come back to the idea that it has to be rooted in reality. It has to be rooted in who you are, what you are. It can't be faked. That'll come out in no time. And then a lot of it is a leap of faith. I mean, it's a hard thing to test branding because you're asking people for their input on something that it's completely out there in space. You're asking them to predict how they will feel or how they will act when something that's never happened before happens. Steve Jobs was famous for saying, you can't really do market research on something that doesn't exist. If you're going to invent the iPhone, you got to go and take the leap of faith because you believe in that product. And around the time that the iPhone came out, I do recall in that era, the BlackBerry advocates saying, I don't want my mail, my texting, my music, my books, my pictures. I don't want that on my phone. I've got an iPod for my music. I've got a digital camera for my pictures. Steve Jobs saw the world differently and took a leap of faith. And a lot of it does come down to that, believing in something, believing in a powerful movement. I think that if you're onto something, you will naturally see people around you start to get excited. And surround yourself with those people and insulate yourself from the others. There will always be people who want to, crap all over your idea. That's the low-hanging fruit. Anyone can find a reason not to like something. I think if you look back in rock history and see all the different rejection letters, some of the famous rejection letters that bands like the Beatles or U2, The Clash, some of my favorite bands kept their rejection letters, and they're beautiful to read because it's just a clear demonstration that nobody really knows until they know. Somebody at Decca Records turned down the Beatles at one point, and I believe it was Sony Music, CBS Records, who turned down U2. You just got to keep pushing. You got to keep believing. And when you do hit that spot where you reach that team of people who get you, then lean on them. That's the accelerant.
Yeah. You talk about consistency in your work as well, Steve, and that the importance of consistency, but also how difficult it can be. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think consistency is something that a lot of people misunderstand. And we all know we have to be consistent in what we do. We have to be consistently great and consistently deliver on expectations. But there is this constant pressure to evolve and change, especially with social media and AI and machine learning and digital. There's constant pressure to change what you do to meet new demographics, new psychographics, new geographics. If you're going to expand into the US, maybe the product needs to be different than it is in Canada. Lots of pressure to change. But the greatest bands in history changed very little. My favorite is ACDC. They're still going 50 some years later, and they've barely changed a thing. Like, they've played essentially the same song over and over again in different ways, the same 3 or 4 chords, the same topics they sing about. But they realized very early on that they were building a tribe of people who would come to an AC/DC show to get that experience. They would pay a lot of money to be part of a movement that was about that AC/DC experience. No matter how big the venue was, no matter whether the album was delivered on vinyl, 8-track, CD, digital download, whatever it was, AC/DC delivered on the experience. And you can look back and see their stage shows have evolved. We mentioned the delivery system from vinyl to 8-track to CD, to cassette to CD, and then to digital. That's evolved. Everything has evolved and changed, but the band has never stopped delivering on what their customers identify as the reason they come to them. And it's the same with Patagonia. I think it's the same with Starbucks. All the big, great brands, they understand what it is that their customers expect, and they deliver on those expectations or over-deliver on those expectations, no matter what elements around it change. So now that we live in a more digital world, I'm experiencing more things digitally. The brands that I interact with digitally, the good ones need to reflect the physical interaction in their digital world too. Every touch point now has to match up with those expectations that I have as a consumer. And so the key to consistency is not changing. The key to consistency is understanding what problem you solve, what joy button you press, what chemical reaction you create in the minds of the people who love you, and just find new ways to deliver on that promise.
So because that's what you got me wondering about, is like, how do you know what things to tweak? What stays part of like the essence and is relatively unchanged, like AC/DC? I don't know if those answers are always easy to figure out, but how do you assess it, I suppose, in the businesses and the teams that you've worked on?
It's not easy. There's a lot of A/B testing. But do it quickly, move quickly. If you're going to, try evolve your brand in a certain direction, you want to A/B test digitally your marketing or your messaging. That's one of the beauties of the connected world we live in, is you'll know right away what's not resonating and what is, if you're testing it, and immediately drop what's not working, immediately drop what doesn't feel right. And that the refusal to compromise on values will often guide you to the right place every time anyway.
Yeah. There's a strong relationship in what you're saying to failure.
Yeah.
How do you get comfortable with failure, I suppose?
Well, I just took a sip of a Coke Zero, and Coca-Cola in the early 80s experienced one of the greatest failures in business history, which of course put them out of business, right? Ended Coke. It didn't. I mean, that's the beauty of the story, is that Coke issued new Coke, canceled regular Coke, created a massive uprising of passion around their brand. It cost them millions, but they galvanized Coke lovers in a way that's probably still paying off to this day. And it was a mistake. Some of the greatest music ever made comes from mistakes. Jam sessions are a great example, but I'm sure Keith Richards and Mick Jagger get into a room, two very different people coming at things from two very different directions, and they find a way to riff off each other and build on top of what each has brought to the table and create incredible songs out of that conflict. Those jam sessions are magic, and the things that get left on the proverbial cutting room floor of the studio are are magic. And we still see that to this day with like a new Beatles song that gets brought to life last year, or an artist like Prince, who we find out has hundreds of songs in a closet somewhere in Minneapolis because they just keep creating and creating, and knowing that not everything they create is going to be good. We need that freedom to fail. And when you look back through rock history, some amazing stories that I love to share in keynote addresses, because you can actually play the audio and show people the example of that freedom to fail at work. One of them is Randy Bachman of BTO, Bachman Turner Overdrive. In the creation of the song Taking Care of Business, he tells an amazing story about being in the studio late at night working on that record. And there's a knock at the studio door, and he answers it. It's a pizza delivery guy. He says, "You guys order pizza?" And Randy says, "No, try Steve Miller's down the hall recording Fly Like an Eagle. Might have been him." So the pizza delivery guy disappears and comes back a couple of minutes later as Randy is playing, Taking Care of Business in the studio. And the pizza delivery guy says, "Hey, I heard you guys doing that song. I think it needs a piano." And Randy's like, "Well, you're a pizza delivery guy." And he says, "Yeah, but it's really simple. 3 chords. I can write it down on a napkin. I can do it right now." Kid goes in, plays piano. They record it. Randy's thinking he'll erase it in the morning and never hear it again. And they all go home for the night. And the next day they play the track back for the producer who wasn't there the night before. And the producer says, "Who's on the piano?" Because that's incredible. That made the song. When you listen to the entire Bachman Turner Overdrive collection of hits, none of them have piano except for Taking Care of Business. And it's all because this pizza delivery guy had the freedom to fail, to walk in and go, "I'll try it, I'll do it." And Randy Bachman had the freedom to fail and saying, "Okay, let's hear how that sounds." They tracked down that pizza delivery guy, signed him to a deal so that he could get paid for his work. That kid went on to become the keyboard director of the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra and had a great career in music, all because of that one night and that freedom to fail. So many of us, like, we're handcuffed to perfection, like we have to do this right. And we let that be the enemy of, we have to do this. We have to just expand our horizons. We have to just create. Another great story that's very similar is the one of a guy named Al Cooper, who was a session musician in the 60s. He was a big fan of Bob Dylan. And he got invited to sit in and watch a Bob Dylan recording session. And he wasn't in the main studio. He was off in another room, and he's a guitar player. And he's watching them roll through the song Like a Rolling Stone. And there's a long history about the song and how many different versions Dylan recorded, and how they recorded some as like 3/4 time, 4/4 time. Some were waltzes, some were slowed down, some were sped up. They just could not find that magic that they knew was buried in that song somewhere. And they had run through it a whole bunch of times. And Al Cooper says to the producer, I've got an idea. Can I go in the studio? And the producer says to him, "Al, you're a guitar player. Sit down, shut up, and watch the band play." Just then, apparently, the phone rang. And Al Cooper took that as his cue to go up and sit down behind a Hammond organ in the studio. He's a guitar player, not an organ player. And he sat down, and when the producer hung up the phone, producer looks out and goes, "Al, what are you doing there?" But they let him stay. And they started going through the song again. But the problem now is that they weren't prepared to have an organ player. So the headphones that are attached to the organ are not turned up properly. So Al Cooper, who's boldly walked into Bob Dylan's studio and sat down behind an organ, can't hear the chord changes. He has to look up and watch the other guys change chords. As a result of that, when you listen to Like a Rolling Stone, you can hear the Hammond organ. It comes in like an 8th note late almost every time. They went back into the studio to play this back, and Dylan says, "Turn up the organ." And that was the magic they were looking for in that song. Those 8th notes where he was late each time provided this sort of magical tension in the song that didn't previously exist. That take, the one with Al Cooper, the guitar player, playing organ wrong, is the version that Rolling Stone magazine called the greatest rock and roll song ever recorded. The freedom to fail. It's how 3M invented Post-it notes. It's how Toll House invented the chocolate chip cookie. If we don't give ourselves the freedom to get into jam sessions with our collaborators and try to write some new songs, we're never going to advance ourselves.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot to pull out, to tease out of those stories. I mean, the pizza delivery guy, you don't have to be part of the team for very long, or if at all, to have something to contribute. The fact that the pizza guy felt comfortable enough just to speak his mind, I mean, there's a lot to be said there for psychological safety, for listening to other people's points of view. So there's a lot there, Steve.
Absolutely, yeah. And there are other stories. We'll definitely cover some of them in Kananaskis in March. But like the police did the same thing. It's like Wayne Gretzky said: you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and we can't in our business, lives, stop taking shots. We have to take those calculated risks. Always remind yourself that, Coke had the biggest global branding screw up in history, and they have to this day the number 1 and number 2 soft drinks in the world. If you're surrounded by a team who trusts you and a team you trust, and you're surrounded by people who can provide you with good counsel and guidance, you can make the odd mistake along the way.
Yeah, bouncing
sometimes you'll make a mistake and realize it wasn't a mistake at all. It was your Bob Dylan or BTO moment.
Yeah, well, most decisions are progress, even if it is deemed as a failure or a mistake, because at least you learn something from it. And then what do you do with it after? We did talk about consistency, but I'm thinking about the Eagles again. And in that documentary, as it pertains to consistency, they talk about Take It Easy. I mean, that's definitely, I think, their signature song. And they had to play it night in and night out for many, many years. And I think in business, so often leaders will change their messages because they get bored of them, but the market has not. What is it about, I guess, rock bands or artists that they can stick with the things that work like that, like the ACDC example and stuff, but where does the resolve to stay with it and get excited about it, knowing that their customers are going to hear it for the first time?
There's a great story that Bruce Springsteen's manager tells, his road manager tells. Springsteen famous for playing endless tours that play 3 hours plus every single night. It takes a crew of hundreds of people to pull off that show. And quite often, there'll be somebody on the tour who's become complacent, or, maybe they hired a new lighting rig guy who joins them in Des Moines, and he's new to the crew. The road manager would bring this new person or this complacent person behind Max Weinberg's drum kit in the middle of the show. There's 30,000 or 50,000 people out there. Springsteen's roaring through Born to Run. And the road manager will say to this guy, for us, this is show 72 of 250 on this tour. For these people, it's show 1 of 1. There's somebody here tonight who is going to meet their future spouse, and this will be the turning point in their entire life. There's somebody here tonight who's traveled thousands of miles and spent money they did not have to experience this the one time they'll get to experience it. There's somebody here today who's terminally ill and knows it, and this will be the last show they ever see. You have to treat every show with that kind of gravitas, and understand that everyone is in that moment. And I think that's easier for a band because you're playing the song. As much as you might be sick of Take It Easy, every time you strum that opening, chord, 20,000 people roar approval at you. If you're in our day-to-day lives, doing the same thing you've done for so many years, and there's not 20,000 people roaring their approval as you do it, it can be a little harder. But treat every single opportunity like Springsteen's road manager does, with that sense of importance and gravity. And it's just a constant reminder that everyone is hearing, whenever a song plays on the radio, someone's hearing it for the first time. Even if it's Bohemian Rhapsody, someone out there is going, what the hell is this? And turning it up. And that is happening. You just don't know what's happening, and it's hard to remember, but you have to remind yourself that, Somebody's hearing this for the first time, and what you're doing today will have an impact on someone meaningfully.
Yeah, I know I'm stretching a bit, but I think in a business context, it's like, first of all, don't run the risk of confusing your customers. And the second part, I guess if you know some things are working, if you change it unnecessarily or prematurely, you're not going to connect with a brand new customer. So it might prevent you from closing new deals or bringing on more work.
Yeah, I think if you look at the brands that you associate with, the things you're partial to, the things you buy regularly, restaurants you go to regularly, the bottle of wine you look for in the liquor store, you notice, I'm sure everyone would notice that they tend to do things repetitively. We go to the same restaurants we like, not because we think they're going to be different, but because we think they're going to be as good as they were last time we went there. If the person who runs that restaurant is so focused on change, you're never going to get that sense of satisfaction that the customer gets. When they uncork that bottle of wine that's been a certain way for their entire life, and then it's not, it doesn't taste very good.
Steve, I've heard you say that sometimes goals can get in the way of your success. What do you mean by that?
Goals can get in the way. Yeah, well, I mean, if your short-term goals can get in the way of your success. You want to achieve something that's big and global and at 30,000 feet, and those little goals along the way can often detract you and distract you from what your bigger mission is. It's so important to pull back that lens and look at it from a much higher level, like we talked about with ACDC and why people go to an ACDC show. It's not so much what they do song to song. I mean, their goal might be, let's play 26 songs tonight. Let's keep the show 2 hours and 14 minutes. Let's be done by 11 p.m. so we don't incur any union overtime. All those little goals can be there. But if you adhere to those little goals, all that little structure gets in the way of that big reason why that fan came to that show. If you've ever been to a concert that got cut short, it's like the worst feeling in the world that the band ended and the lights came on and there was supposed to be more. But because of a short-term goal, the long-term goal was ruined.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I've got one more business question, and then I got some more personal ones for you. But the other piece that I was interested when I take a look at your content and all the things you're putting out there, you talk about competitors, and the competitive landscape, I think, is getting trickier and more crowded than I think we've ever seen it. But you suggest that there's ways that we might be able to use our competitors' strengths against them.
The song Know Your Enemy by Green Day comes to mind, because you have to know your enemy. And a lot of us want to put our competitors out of business. I'm actually of a different mindset. I think you want to keep your competitors around because we need, as consumers, ways to frame things. If a Rolex is only a luxury watch because there's a Timex for $50. If all watches cost $10,000, then a Rolex is just another watch. Premium is only a premium because there's something else to compare it to. And so our competitors become that frame of reference for our customers to understand what makes us different. You can't be different than nothing. You have to be different than something. And your competitors are that something that your customers get to compare you to. And you can, I don't want to put my competitors out of business. I want to keep them around, barely making payroll every second week for the rest of their miserable lives, but I want them there because they will frame how my business is perceived. The American example of Walmart versus Target is a great example, because Target, although they failed in the Canadian marketplace, there's a lot of other reasons for that are unrelated to branding. I think as a brand, Target was very well established in Canada. As a supply chain, they were a disaster. But focusing on the branding and focusing on America, Walmart is heavily cemented in save money. Everything Walmart does is about saving you money. And Target brilliantly came in with the attitude of giving yourself something better. And even though Target is a discount department store just like Walmart, they've invited consumers to shop at Target. They've created this idea that Target is somehow slightly higher quality than Walmart. And for those customers who find it beneath them to go to Walmart, they can go to Target. The other example in the US as well, Home Depot, heavily established and cemented as the do-it-yourself store. It's right there. You can do it. We can help. Lowe's came along and realized that there are a lot of people who hurt themselves with power tools and don't want to go to a do-it-yourself store. Lowe's positioning statement became, let's build something together. That's the comfort that a whole lot of people needed. That only works because there is a do-it-yourself store already. Lowe's was able to take do-it-yourself and use it as a weapon against Home Depot. Target was able to take low price and use it as a weapon against Walmart, to position them as cheap, to position them as poor products. Home Depot positioned as, smells like wood chips and is there for the contractor. Your competitors are doing things. Understand what they're doing, understand why they're doing it, understand why their consumers choose them over you, understand why your consumers choose you over them. And often you'll find that nugget that becomes sort of your new reason to live, which is that Walmart versus Target, Home Depot versus Lowe's thing that you reposition as their weakness, even though to them it's their strength.
Yeah. Steve, we can't talk the music industry without talking about Taylor Swift. And, when I look at Taylor Swift, I think wow, amazing songwriter, probably not the best singer ever, but good singer. But she has created a phenomenon, Girl Next Door, all that kind of stuff. But tell me what's going on behind the Taylor Swift phenomenon from your lens, the way you look at things.
There is so much genius in the Taylor Swift camp that it's hard to even know where to begin with it. From the very start, Taylor was always the kind of artist who wanted to connect with her fans, one-on-one human connections. And that's evident from the very beginning. Her songs were always extremely vulnerable and lens into the breakups she was going through. The old joke about, don't date Taylor Swift, you'll end up the topic of a song. It was very true. And she surrounded herself with a team that gets that and that thinks the same way. I've had a couple of opportunities over the past decade to go backstage and meet Taylor. And it's quite an experience, not just because she's a wonderful person and very nice to meet and chat with, but the team, watching her team at work was just absolute commitment, absolute genius. The best example of that is the last time I saw her here in Toronto. A couple of days before the show, her road manager sent me an email and asked me to send over picture ID for myself and my guest, who at the time was going to be my niece, who was 16. And so I sent those over. And then when I saw him backstage, I said, you guys have some serious security here. I've never had that before. I mean, quite often when you get to the venue and you're on a guest list to go backstage, you'll flash ID, but that's it. It's not like you're getting on an airplane where you have to show your passport 6 different times. But Taylor Swift's team had that airport-like security. And I said to the guy, that's incredible security. And he said, it's not security. Taylor gets those pictures and the names so that she can greet certain fans by name when she sees them. This is the biggest star on the planet. She does not have to do this sort of thing. But when my niece walked in the room, Taylor came over and said, Reese, it's so good to see you, and made a fan for life out of this 16-year-old girl. Not like that was difficult. I mean, a 16-year-old girl meeting Taylor Swift is going to be pretty exciting. But for her to know her name was wild. And for Taylor to pick up a tray of cookies and say, hey, Reese, you want a cookie? And here's Taylor Swift serving me cookies. And then when Taylor had to go get ready, they handed us over to Taylor's mom, who took us for a tour backstage and showed us how the show comes off. It's just unbelievable, the machine behind Taylor Swift. And one of the great little pieces of insight that shows you how dedicated they are to her success and to her values. Try find out anything about them online. Her company's called 13 Management. They're invisible because they only exist for her. They're not out there getting other clients. They're not out there helping other bands. That infrastructure, that organization exists because Taylor Swift has a set of values as a performer and as an individual. And she's surrounded herself by a team who helps her live up to them. The way she bonused her truck, I could go on about Taylor Swift for the next hour. The bonuses she gave her truck drivers on this tour, that whole story went viral. The time she paid off a kid's college debt when the kid tweeted about not having enough money to go to the show. Taylor will go online and look for her fans and insert herself into the conversation, even though she's the biggest star on the planet and doesn't need to do any of that.
Showing up at birthday parties. Yeah. So, Steve, I'm so glad I asked you that question. You've got a lot of insight there. And I think the closest I can relate to that, I met Jamie Foxx in a hotel gym in Denver in 2017. And he took the time to chat with me and film a little video for an Edmonton charity that went viral. And instantaneously, anything that Jamie Foxx puts out, I love it. And and how many people did I tell about how great a guy this is? And you make a million connections, one person at a time, and you create you said movement a lot in this conversation, but you create a movement of people that almost like they got your back.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens when you meet a rock star and they live up, a movie star, a rock star, whatever it might be, they live up to this idolized version of them that we as fans tend to have. And I had a chance to meet Mick Fleetwood, who was an idol for years, and Jimmy Page, and these guys who are just have done the most amazing things in rock and roll, and they're just so down to earth. One of my favorite stories along those lines is I've been a lifelong Jimmy Buffett fan, and the time I met Jimmy, he walked in the room and he introduced himself. Like, of course you're Jimmy Buffett. But he didn't say, I'm Jimmy Buffett. He said, hey, I'm Jimmy, and shook my hand and sat down. And then he wanted to hear your stories. He didn't want to talk about himself. It's beautiful when rock stars live up to the idolized versions we have, and we tell each other those great stories, and we love the work they do from that point on. It's the same with a business. It's the same when something goes wrong and you reach out to an organization and they make it right. You become an evangelist. You become part of their movement, and you tell the world about it. Similarly, when things go wrong, you leave the movement and they've let you down, and you tell the world about it. It's amazing how similar the experience is.
Yeah, you correct mistakes and do it the right way and deal with it in a timely fashion. You probably have a customer for life. I've got some really strong relationships at Results that are 12 years in the making now that started off on not the right footing. And
there's nothing more powerful than the opportunity to right a wrong. That is about the most powerful bond building tool you have in your arsenal. That's a good thing to consider, that things will go wrong. Murphy's law is real. Things will go wrong, and how you as an organization prepare yourself to correct the wrongs is going to speak volumes about your business.
Steve, I got to ask you, what is it like when you're meeting all of these people? Like, you're going to go backstage and meet Taylor Swift. You've met her a couple of times. Like, are you thinking about conversation starters a couple of days in advance? Are you just showing up and just being you? Like, what is it like to meet these people?
I try to just show up and be me. I try to not think it through too much about who you're about to meet. I think there are a few artists who would give me that sense of, oh my God, I'm about to meet my idol. But no, most of the time I try not to think it through too much. And what ends up almost universally happening is you realize that these people are just like you. I met Dave Grohl in a men's washroom in Reykjavik, Iceland. And we washed our hands together and had a great conversation, and then grabbed a picture, and life went on. They're just normal, down to earth people. And I think most of the time when you have that celebrity encounter, if you're not pressing them, it's like, if you just treat them like your friend and just like another person, I think that's a connecting thing with people who are often treated like they're different.
Yeah. Well said. What's a band that should have been bigger than it was?
Oh my God. Wow. Oh, wow. You hit me with a curveball there. My 80s is going to show here. Well, and 90s, I guess 90s. The Tragically Hip. Great, huge in our country, and they couldn't get arrested in the rest of the world, and that was a sin, I think. They were so incredible as a band at what they had to say, and the fact that the rest of the world didn't get it at the time really made me mad. Now, I feel like now that the band is gone and Gord's left us, I look back and go, I'm kind of glad the rest of the world didn't get it because they're our little secret.
Yeah, I think I hoped when they had their appearance on SNL that was going to change. I think they played Nautical Disaster, maybe another song, but I thought
they played Nautical Disaster and Grace too.
And I thought that was going to be the moment, hey? So
and then they did Woodstock 99, and you kept thinking this is it. The world's going to get it. And then they didn't. So I've come to a place where I'm quite comfortable with the fact that Canadians share this special secret that is the Tragically Hip. But at the time, I really wanted them to be world famous. And
you've got a really cool thing on your LinkedIn page when you're posting the underappreciated music. One of the ones that you recently had that really struck a chord for me was Level 42, because Something About You is one of my all-time favorite songs, but they never really made it, and they were misunderstood in America, you said, which is sort of, we don't have time to get into that today, but you've got some great insights on your LinkedIn that I sure enjoyed.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I have a lot of fun with the underappreciated 80s. A lot of it is because of the geographic differences. Some of the bands who were huge in the UK and couldn't get any recognition in America, vice versa, Canadian bands that never clicked, elsewhere. And we look back on their music and we don't give it enough credit. But Level 42 is a great example, like a band that just had so much talent, so many cool songs. And for some reason on this side of the planet, we just didn't quite understand.
Yeah. Well, and it would be fascinating if there was any way it's like comparing McDavid to Gretzky. If you could take this era's media channels and apply it to the decades gone by, what sort of an impact, if any, would that have made on some of those other bands? Last question I got for you, Steve, and you did mention Fleetwood and Page and Jimmy Buffett, but who's on the Mount Rushmore of the artists that you have met?
That I have met, so not that I would love to meet in the future.
Let's do both of those.
Well, Springsteen would be high. Bruce Springsteen to me would be the highest on the haven't met. On the artists that I have met, Mick Fleetwood was really high on that list because I've always admired him. We'll talk about this during my keynotes. All the adversity that guy overcame, like as an individual, as a member of the band, all the personal struggles and trials and tribulations, and the fact that they just persevered and powered through everything. Absolutely, he would be high on the list. Jimmy Buffett is right up there for me because I think, what that guy represents in terms of business acumen is incredible. He's built a multi-billion-dollar empire around one song about getting drunk on the beach. And then there are a lot of little stars but like lesser known stars that I really just loved spending time with. And the Bare Naked Ladies were high on that list. Like just great human beings. You could sit down and have a beer and not know you're in the presence of guys who've had number one hits.
That's awesome. Steve, I have enjoyed this conversation immensely. You've got such fascinating stories and experiences, and the way that you can pull them back and share insights out of those stories is wonderful. So thank you for being here today. Where can people track you down?
I'm at brandlikearockstar.com, and on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram, my handle is at Rockstar Brands. Well, on LinkedIn, it's my name, but on the socials, it's Rockstar Brands and brandlikearockstar.com.
Right on. So many takeaways today. And of all of the takeaways, the thing that is really standing out for me is the risk of insult is the price of clarity. So anybody listening here today, go and take a risk. Even if it means you might get insulted, it probably means you're on the right track and not the wrong one.
Absolutely agree. Thank you so much. This has been a blast, Jeff. Thanks.
Right on. Thanks for joining us, Steve. You take good care. If you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever your favorite podcasts are found. And if you're part of a leadership team and you just know that your organization is capable of even better performance, please reach out to us at unleashresults.com for a conversation and to learn more about how we might help unleash the potential of your team and organization.